Everyone. Thank you all for joining. We are so happy to have you all. We are just admitting a few more people as we wait for people to come in from the waiting room. We will get started momentarily, but we are very, very happy to have you all. I am Patrick. I'm one of the board members here with Indivisible, Illinois. I'd like to introduce our other board members here to you as well. Marcy.
Hi, I'm Marcy. I'm also on the Indivisible Illinois Exec Board. I'm from Champaign, which is not anywhere near Chicago for anyone who wants to know. And then we also have two other board members. I'll say Linda.
Hi, everybody. I'm Linda. I am on the board also with Indivisible DuPage and Truth Brigade, Illinois. And Jeanette.
I'm Jeanette Quirk. I'm with Indivisible West Suburban Chicago and also Indivisible Chicago Alliance.
Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting on a few more to enter the room. We are so excited to have you all. In the meantime, let's talk about a few of our upcoming events that we have going on as we admit a few more. We've got some fantastic events that are coming up. So I want everyone to put a date on your calendar as a save the date. We'll have the RSVP link out very shortly for everyone, but we are going to have our statewide Blue State convening here for Illinois. It's going to be on June the 28th in Champaign-Urbana. It's going to be a fun day where we're going to hear about all of our steps as we head towards 2026 and 2025 as we head towards the elections. We're going to hear a lot about what our plans are as Indivisible Illinois. We're going to hear about our partnerships as well. So we'll hear from a few partner organizations. We'll also hear from our elected officials. So we hope that you all can join us for that day. It's going to be a full day of strategic planning. We'll also hear from a lot of our partner organizations on how we can collaborate with them to make our democracy better. I want to hand it over to Marcy, who's going to tell you a bit about some of the phone banking and other activities that we have going on.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Yes, we have phone banks going on every Sunday. It started yesterday, and it's going, except for Father's Day, every Sunday from 4 to 5:30. We are phone banking into three different congressional districts. They're the three congressional districts that in Illinois that have Republican Congress people. That's Mike Boss district in the Illinois 12, Mary Miller's district in the Illinois 15, and Darren LaHood's district in the Illinois 16. We are letting their voters know that that they are trying to cut Medicaid and what that means for them and what that means for their communities and how risky it would make things. And I'm going to put links in the chat to the phone bank for next Sunday and for the Sunday following. So that will be May 25th and June 1st. And like I said, every Sunday for the near future except for Father's Day. Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to pass it back to you.
Fantastic. And I see we've got people from all over the country in the chat. So keep putting your name, your location into the chat. We are going to have a Q&A after we hear from our speakers tonight. So if you have questions, please put those questions into the chat. We'll read those off. Put in big caps question before, and when we get to the Q&A section, you will be able to hear the answers from our two panel members today. So we're going to start things off with Ed Yanka. Ed Yanka is the Director of Communications and Public Policy for the ACLU of Illinois, a role he has held since June 1999. As the organization's primary spokesman, Ed is a leading voice on civil rights issues, regularly appearing on television and radio programs across Illinois and nationwide. His insights are frequently cited in newspapers and publications on legal and legislative matters central to the ACLU's mission. Before joining the ACLU, Ed served as a staff member for the American Bar Association from 1987 to 1999. And most notably, he was the special presidential assistant in the office of the ABA's president. So I'm going to hand it over to Ed.
Hey, thank you, Patrick. It's really good to be here with you. And I wish we were here to talk about something that was good and that was great. Unfortunately, we're here to talk about a real constitutional crisis in our country. Should I just go ahead and do the opening, Patrick, and then?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So let me tell you, I'm going to start at a little bit at the top about how we at the ACLU sort of see the crisis that we're seeing in our courts and really the attacks on the rule of law today. And I think in many ways, they come in sort of a couple of big buckets. And the first is what we're seeing is a real effort to undermine and diminish the courts. And this can best be seen in both the way in which the administration has misled the courts. We know now based on timing that, for example, in the ACLU case that was challenging the use of the so-called Alien Enemies Act, in fact, that while the court was in recess, in which the government lawyer was supposed to go off and find out more information about whether or not there would be planes that would be headed to El Salvador, planes actually were taking off. And when the court ordered them to turn around any planes that were in the air, the government represented that there were not any planes in the air, and we know that there were now. And so what we see is this effort to directly mislead the court in terms of what the government is doing, the way it's acting, and the impact that its actions are having. So that is one thing that, sort of is generally undermining our system of justice and the court system itself. The second thing, and the second way in which we're seeing, is that the administration has really begun to simply ignore court orders. We see, for example, that the president acknowledged in a recent interview that he could pick up the phone anytime he wanted and call President Bukele of El Salvador and get Kilmar Garcia returned to the United States. The Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that the president needs to facilitate Mr. Garcia's return to this country. He's the person who was deported in error, and what the administration admits was an error. And of course, facilitate would be to pick up the phone and call the president of El Salvador and have him returned. And of course, but the president says he won't do it because Mr. Garcia is still, in his mind, someone who is a gang member and a member of MS-13, even though there literally is not any evidence that has ever been presented to the court to demonstrate that he is. So in that way, just simply avoiding, ignoring, playing out, moving from court to court, moving from venue to venue, is another way that we're seeing the administration sort of play out this effort to just sort of try to evade responsibility of answering to the courts. And then the last thing that we're seeing is, of course, the direct threats to judges across the country who rule in ways that the administration doesn't agree with. And we're really seeing this in a couple of different ways. At first, the administration, members of the Trump administration, along with their representatives and allies in Congress, have loudly proclaimed that certain judges, especially in some of the immigration cases, who rule in a fashion that they disagree with, should be impeached. It is not suggested that these judges in any way, shape, or form have, behaved in a fashion which is inappropriate or corrupt. They have simply ruled in a way that the administration doesn't agree with or doesn't like. And that's the thing which they say should result in their being removed from the bench. And even beyond that, we're seeing these efforts to intimidate judges across the country the pizza deliveries in the names of judges' children being sent directly to their home, even though they didn't order a pizza, with notes of threats and various ways in which it's clear that the pizza was ordered, and that folks want the judges to know that they know where they live, they know their children's names, they have this kind of information about them. And that kind of intimidation, I think you can't look at, outside of, frankly, you can't look at outside of the kinds of threats that are being made against other people, the efforts to intimidate them, the fact that you have people who, committed acts of violence on January 6th who have now been, pardoned and released in the country. And so there is this effort to make judges fear that ruling against the administration not only brings them attacks in public, those are things that often happen, but actually will bring physical violence. And so that big pool of things is something that we see. The second big, I think, bucket of attacks are the attacks that we're seeing on law firms across the country. And the reason why I think these attacks, as the president has singled out particular law firms who have taken cases that he doesn't like, who employ lawyers whom in the past have tried to hold him accountable for criminal acts. I think in many ways, one of the things that these attacks then have resulted in are these various agreements where law firms have said that they would contribute X amount of pro bono hours to issues that the president supports. And of course, since that time, what we've seen is that being kind of a moving target, where on the one hand, they were going to do pro bono for veterans' rights, and then suddenly they were going to do pro bono to engage in land deals for coal companies, and then it's something different the next week. So I think these attacks on the firms to try to keep them away from taking cases that challenge immigration policy, that challenge other policies of the administration, as something is a lot of what we're seeing. So I think that one of the questions that you all may be asking or wondering is, why is all this happening? What is this really about? And I think the way to think about this, or the way to conceptualize this, is to think about what the president said a week ago when he was asked directly whether or not he needed to follow the Constitution. And his answer was, I don't know. He didn't say yes. He didn't remind himself that he'd taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. He said, I don't know. And what I don't know means that, in many ways, it means that he intends to pursue and enforce particular policies, and he doesn't care if those policies are consistent with the Constitution or lawful. He intends to do them, and if the courts, in fact, rule against him, he is not committed yet to following a court order. And I would note also that, just last week, when the Supreme Court heard the argument in the birthright citizenship case about whether or not federal courts and federal court judges can issue nationwide injunctions, that when pressed directly by two justices as to whether or not it was the policy of the administration to follow the court's orders, the Solicitor General of the United States answered the question both times with the word generally. So no commitment to follow those orders, every order. If they lose, just generally follow them, which obviously, one can interpret in lots of different ways. And I think that's a little bit of the frightening landscape that we see. Last word I'll say is that, all of this undermines fundamentally the rule of law. And the reason that the rule of law is so important is that one of the things that the rule of law has always done is protect to the greatest degree it can all of us. So, when we think about these things, I know there are some people in the political world who will say, oh, we shouldn't worry about the immigration issues, or we shouldn't talk about those, or we shouldn't really have to worry about protecting those rights. Or you hear that sometimes about trans issues as well. Oh, those are losers for us politically, we'll hear. And so therefore, we shouldn't focus on those issues. The problem is that once you cleave off the rights of a particular group of people, you open yourself up to the same attacks. And those very same tools that were used to attack someone else can then be used to attack you. If Venezuelans and it's some group from Venezuela can suddenly be declared terrorists, why not somebody else? Why not the ACLU? I shouldn't even speak that out loud. That's probably the next executive order. But that is the world in which we're facing with this administration. And it's one of the reasons that I think we need everybody to stand up and call out when the administration doesn't follow court orders, when they mislead the courts, because I think that's critically important to protecting the rule of law for all of us. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Ed. And for everyone who has questions, please continue to put those questions into the chat with questions in caps at the beginning, and we're going to have time for Q&A for both of our panel members. So next, I'd like to introduce Judge Margaret O'Connell. She was elected as the Circuit Court Judge in DuPage County in 2020 and currently serves as the presiding judge for the Felony Division. In this role, she oversees 6 felony courtrooms as well as the county's drug court and the first appearance court. Judge O'Connell was recently appointed as an alternate member of the Illinois Courts Commission, which reviews judicial conduct across the state. Prior to joining the bench, she had an extensive legal career in the private sector, practicing in federal courts, in the Illinois Appellate Court, and in the Illinois Supreme Court. I'd like to hand it over now to Judge O'Connell.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. So many of the, I share all of the thoughts and concerns. I think selfishly, my largest concern is the intimidation of judges, the situation with judges being intimidated is ever growing. It's an issue at all levels, whether they be state court or federal court judges. The pizza deliveries are actually being sent in the name of a federal court judge whose son was murdered by a lawyer that came to her home looking for her and got her son, who answered the door. That's appalling. And she was interviewed on the news just a little while ago, and she talked about how obviously the pain never goes away, but the idea that people are utilizing her son and his name in doing this is even more offensive. So, and I have seen it myself at the state court level. I can tell you that since our current president has behaved the way that he does, I have seen a great amount of disrespect in my courtroom, in the courthouse, from lawyers, from jurors, from prospective jurors. And it really is one of those situations where you look at our leader, the leader of the free world, and he behaves badly, and that sends a message to everybody else that they can do that. The difference is for people who behave badly in front of me, I will hold them in contempt. I have the ability to put them in jail. I have the ability to fine them. It is nothing that I want to do, and it is nothing that I take pleasure in doing. I can see in the chat that people are asking, like, well, what is the remedy? And the issue is that our current president is ruling through executive orders. And that's really not, it's not at all what our founding fathers wanted. It's not what our founding fathers fought for. It's not what they wrote on a piece of paper. It's not what they gave their lives and their freedom for. The idea is that we are to be a country governed by laws that are brought by the people and respected by the people. Ruling by executive order is just not the way to do it. This administration has signed more executive orders in the first 100 days than I think any other administration in history. And as our first speaker said, you know, there is no respect for the rule of law. You have judges that are ruling against this administration. They are saying that what the administration is doing is incorrect, that it is not following with the terms of due process, which is again a founding principle of our country. It's the main portion of our Constitution. So we are in Illinois, it's a little different because but even here, you can see our leaders are being attacked by this administration because they have said things and they have done things that this administration does not agree with. So, bullies running, amok and running our country is not, it's unsustainable at this point. The question that's been asked is, well, what can we do? And the reality is that we can do that which we are doing, which is protest and protest peacefully and let our leaders here in our states, I know some of you are not from Illinois, know that we disagree with them. It is important that we realize that we are in the midst of a constitutional crisis, and we have to do everything that we can in the most peaceful and constructive way possible. We cannot bring ourselves down to the level of what this administration is doing. Is it frustrating? Yes. One of my, fellow judges was just arrested in Wisconsin for interceding when ICE agents were in her courtroom. I can tell you that in my courthouse, we have had ICE agents in the courthouse. I can tell you that as a felony judge, when I take a plea, I must ask, the first question that I have to ask is whether or not the individual is a United States citizen. I no longer ask that question. I merely give the admonition that if you are not a United States citizen, then I must tell you this, that, and the other thing. And that is because I do not want I don't want to condone the behavior of ICE coming into our courtrooms. We all know people who, there are certain communities that people don't even go to church anymore because they're afraid that they will be swept up. And that's just not, we can't be comfortable in this. And as said earlier, once they start with one group, they're coming for the next. So any of us who consider ourselves, and my family, my family wasn't here, in 1776. I don't have any direct relation back to the founding fathers. Any of us can be swept up in something that we, should not be swept up in and denied due process. So peaceful protest is the way to do it. We have to be consistent, and we just have to maintain the fight. Thank you, Patrick. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer any questions specifically. There are a bunch on my screen, but if you want to read them to me.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Judge O'Connell. We'll have a whole Q&A section following very soon. We're just going to go through some of the upcoming events again. as our other administrators go through the questions, and they will read those off momentarily. So again, for everyone who wasn't able to join us at the beginning, I'm Patrick. I'm one of the executive board members here with Indivisible, Illinois. We would love for you all to come to some of our upcoming events. So one of the upcoming events that we have coming up is our state convening, which is going to happen on June the 28th. It's going to be in Champaign, Urbana. We will have details on that for you shortly, as well as the RSVP link at the end of this week. We hope you are able to join us. It's going to be from 10 until 6 p.m. It's going to be a full day where we're going to hear from coalition partners. So we'll hear about what our coalition partners are doing. We'll also hear from Indivisible leaders at the national level, as well as us here at the state level. You hear about what our plans are as we continue on into 2025 and into 2026, that crucial election year, what our strategy is overall, and we'll do some strategic planning. We'll also hear from some of our elected officials. So we hope that you're able to join us for that. It's going to be on June the 28th in Champaign, Urbana. We also, on June the 14th, it is No King's Day. We're going to be doing a national protest, all Indivisible groups, as well as many other coalition partners all across the country, where we're going to be standing up for democracy. So we hope that you're able to join us for this national day of action, where there are going to be protests all across the country. You can find those events on our website. We'll also follow up with all of you about how you can sign up for these events that are happening all across the country. I want to hand it over to Marcy now, who's going to talk with you about our phone banks, as well as get the Q&A session started.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Yes, and I mentioned this earlier on, but Indivisible Illinois is doing phone banking every Sunday. We started yesterday, actually, and we are going to be doing it every Sunday for the foreseeable future, other than on Father's Day. It's from 4 to 5:30 on Zoom. And where we're calling is, this is issue oriented. We are calling into 3 congressional districts, the 3 congressional districts in Illinois that have Republican Congress people. That's the Illinois 12, which is Mike Boast's district, Illinois 15, which is Mary Miller's district, and Illinois 16, which is Darren LaHood's district. And we're telling their voters that their Congress people are planning to cut Medicaid. What does that mean for them? And what does that mean for their city and their county? Because it definitely doesn't mean anything good. Especially a lot of these places are very, very rural, and of course, you know, with rural places that have hospitals and doctors, it's going to be really tight for them, and a lot of them may have to close. I will put the links in the chat to sign up for both this Sunday and next Sunday, the 25th and the 1st. And they're from 4 to 5:30 on Zoom. And we'll get the Q&A started. I think I'm going to have either Linda or Jeanette start doing those, and we'll and all of us will be asking the questions that you guys put in the chat.
Okay, I can go ahead and start, and then Jeanette can tell me what I missed. I've got like a page and a half of questions, a lot of questions. So I'll start with very big news, and I don't know if you'd call it a lighter one or not, but you know, nothing's light. The latest threat to go after Oprah, Beyonce, and I forget who else, because of supposedly interference with the election. Could somebody just talk about what you think is going to happen there, if anything?
I'll take a stab at this, and the judge may have more to say. There's nothing to go after. There are entertainers who have endorsed a candidate that is not the current president, and he's mad. This is the midnight ramblings of a petulant child. And nothing will happen from this. This is, you know, much like, I think, some of what we've seen where he demands that certain people be investigated and then nothing takes place, you know, as the result of that. I think this kind of thing is apparently just something he needs to blow off steam or pressure. But nothing will come of any of these threats.
Okay, thanks. There's been a few questions that kind of fall into the same category, so I'm going to summarize a little bit. What can anybody do? The courts, the military, maybe, state marshals, etc., either to force Trump to be in compliance, or if we can't do anything about him, Bondi or the lawyers, anybody involved in cases where the court, especially when you get to SCOTUS, is not being followed the court rule, what, if anything, can be done to force some compliance?
So when I am faced with this issue and I have, let's say that I've issued a pretrial ruling, and so I tell a defendant, like, you have to wear a scram, which is an alcohol bracelet that they have to wear, and they violate that. We have what we call sanction hearings, and then I can sanction you. And then, it just goes up from there as to how long I can put you in jail. So unfortunately, our current president is, nobody's going to put him in jail. You know what I mean? Like, the reality of the situation is that. But I think at some point, especially when it comes to the return of Mr. Garcia, which we are not seeing the government take any action on, it would not be out of the realm of possibility for a federal judge to say, I'm putting you in jail as the attorney who is the attorney is misrepresenting the facts. When you say there aren't planes in the air, and then there are, and things like that, that in and of itself, as a lawyer misrepresenting the facts and lying to a judge, I think that is contemptuous. But that's the most that we can do at this point. And the problem is that, the U.S. Supreme Court does have many Trump appointees on it. And they know how he operates. They're not going to, rule against him, in order for, even though, they're appointed for life. They could really do whatever they want, but they just don't have I don't think they have the backbone to do it. So, that's the next thing that I could see happen, is a lawyer who appears before a judge knowingly misrepresenting facts, being held in contempt and being fined or put in jail.
And then kind of
Can I
Yep.
just add? I'm sorry, may I add a couple of things to that?
Yep.
Because I think there are two other sort of medium and long-term impacts that we're likely to see come out of this ultimately. I think number one, one of the things that the administration has done is literally expend the bulk of its capital in terms of with the courts in these first few weeks. It's going to be really hard for the administration to go with a straight face to a court and say, we attest to X as the truth, when they've been proven to not be truthful in so many other cases. And the problem that gets into is it really mitigates, lessens their ability to be successful in terms of future litigation. And I think that's one of the things that in the near term is going to work against them, because they're going to have just these rulings are going to compound against them. The second thing, and I think this is, something we saw from the 2020 election fallout, was, individual lawyers who misrepresented things in court and behaved in a way which was not consistent with the ethical guidelines ended up, suffering penalties up to and including losing their law license. And I think there's a chance that some of the lawyers who were involved in some of these matters on behalf of the government could well find themselves in that circumstance once they leave these positions. Again, this is not criminal sanctions, but I think losing their ability to practice law could be something, which one might well see follow on from here.
Thanks. Yeah, that was going to be my question is, will they eventually hopefully be held accountable, even if it takes a while? And we did see that in the first administration, which was good. Either one of you, can you give an update on both the Garcia case specifically, like where is it at? And then all the people that are in that got sent to El Salvador, where does that stand right now?
Let me jump in on those, and if the judge wants to add anything. So in terms of Mr. Garcia, there's sort of two tracks that are happening. The government has appealed the order from the district, appealed the order from the district court judge that went all the way up to the Supreme Court about Mr. Garcia's return, and whether or not, in the words of the lower court judge, the government was compelled to effectuate Mr. Garcia's return. The Supreme Court sent that back down for further action in the lower court, with the modest, I would say, with the alteration that they tried to effectuate his return rather than facilitate. I've looked at those two words in the dictionary. I struggle a little bit with the difference, but there is a slight difference there. But the second thing that's happened is the judge in that case has begun contempt proceedings against the administration now for not following the order of her court as well as the Supreme Court. In the meantime, I think what's sad is that Mr. Garcia continues to languish in El Salvador, a country which he should not have been deported to in the first instance. So, those proceedings are now moving along at a very slow pace. But what was the remedial action that the court intended for the government to take? They have not taken as yet. In the Alien Enemies Act, which is the statute, the 1798 statute that was used in order to send the hundreds of people to Venezuela. Essentially, as you probably saw last Friday, the Supreme Court blocked another group of people being transferred to those conditions. It is expected that, now that the Supreme Court has ruled in that way, that the administration is really closed off from moving people there. A federal district court has also blocked the administration from moving a group of detainees to Libya, which they plan to do, and house them in a part of Libya that has been, sort of occupied and ruled by a warlord for the last several years since Muammar Gaddafi fell. That litigation is continuing to move forward both in Washington, D.C. And in Texas. In Washington, D.C., again, the question of whether or not the government was truthful with the court and what Judge Boasberg might do in terms of a contempt hearing is moving forward there. In the Texas case, again, after the Supreme Court's ruling, the government is required to provide a significant amount of due process, just some hearing for people to be able to challenge their detention and their removal. And those cases are expected to, at some point, sort of move forward if the government continues with this plan. What is left, I think, unsaid, as you can tell by me, and what you're hearing in terms of what the question really entails is what nobody has yet figured out is a way in which to compel the administration to remove the people who were sent to El Salvador and return them to the United States. I think that is a ruling and an order that we may need to get all the way to the Supreme Court until we see something like that play out. The last thing I'll just say about this is All of these questions over these removals have almost all been about the due process claims, about the procedure, about what the rules are that you have to follow before you send someone abroad like this. We're now starting to get rulings where courts are actually looking at the question as to whether or not the Alien Enemies Act actually applies in the current circumstance. I won't give all of you a quiz on the Alien Enemies Act tonight, but you should know that it actually requires the country to have been invaded. Near as I can figure out, there's been no invasion. I looked outside my window before we began again tonight, and there simply is no invasion going on out there. I think the argument is paper thin as to the use of this act, and as you may have read over the weekend in the New York Times, the administration seems to be trying to backfill this. They are trying to compel or organize the intelligence services in a way where they will proclaim that there's been this cooperation and collaboration between the Venezuelan government and this group, Tren de Aragua, which nobody in the administration's intelligence community thought existed. And yet they fired the people who did the analysis and are asking people to do that again.
Okay, I'm going to ask two more questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette. Looks like there's a lot more questions that showed up since we started asking. So the administration just got rid of temporary protection status for Venezuelan immigrants. What is that going to do to those? I think it's like 350,000 people. Well, what's the next step for them now? Are they going to be able to go through some hearing and show that they still are at risk, or do you know what happens at this point?
Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
Let me say this quickly. So the short answer is the status, the broad status that they had been granted under temporary protective status to stay without being subject to deportation was removed, as you pointed out today. There can now be proceedings against these individuals, but each of them are likely to have one or more claims to remain in the United States. And those claims will have to be adjudicated in at least an immigration court and perhaps then in federal court before folks should be removed. The difficulty is that, of course, all of those people will have to go find a lawyer. Will have to go through that process. It'll be very disruptive for many of their lives. Many of them may not understand the process and think they have to leave and might, therefore depart. So it's a disruptive in and of itself, but it shouldn't be conclusive for all of the thousands of people who are affected.
And as Ed just said, while the protection that allowed them to stay has been removed, their ability to stay is now subject to some sort of judicial review. We can't have mass deportations because of this. And this is exactly what happened with all the people that were taken to El Salvador, the people that they wanted to take to Libya. All of them were denied due process. So by this protection being stripped, it will be a great impact upon our court system, especially the immigration courts, which, this current administration is defunding so much of the federal government on one hand, and then just their request in and of itself, they had to have some forward thinking to know that if that did happen, that there would be an influx of work and just cases. And we don't have judges that are hearing cases 24 hours a day. So it's going to be very impactful. But again, that's if they honor the due process that all of us are entitled to. Just because these people no longer have that protection, and what Ed said is I think he's right, is very true, that like they'll probably have other arguments to make as to why it is that they should and could be able to stay. So these are things that are going to have to work through their way through the court system, even though that's not truly, that was not the intent of the administration when they sought this.
Okay, and then one more question for you, Judge O'Connell, before I turn it over to Jeanette. Somebody was just asking, can you explain again, I think we've all heard it before, what is the difference between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant?
So, well, an administrative warrant is, I guess I'm confused. I'm not really sure how that term is being used. I can tell you a judicial warrant is issued when a sitting judge, I can issue a warrant for a variety of things. Obviously, I'm a criminal judge, so anything like that. If somebody doesn't pay child support, we can issue a warrant, which is in the form of a body writ, for that person to be taken into custody and held until such a time as they post, some amount of money to satisfy their child support obligation. Administratively, I mean, if you're talking about administrative agencies, I don't see
I'm
how
talking specifically related to immigration, because you hear that ICE will come and somebody might have a warrant that's an administrative warrant. That's what I'm referring to.
So, so an administrative warrant that is obtained by ICE is done, it's not an open hearing. Even now, I have defendants that should be in front of me that are in ICE custody, and there is a database, but then all of a sudden these people will just disappear from the database and we don't know where they went. How they got into that custody and what we as judges worry about in my courthouse is when you're coming in and you say you have this warrant, somebody needs to see that. Who issued that warrant? What administrative agency is issuing these warrants? So many of the videos that we see of ICE coming to people's homes, they're covering these officers are covering their faces. That's very suspect to me. So an administrative warrant would be something that is issued through, oh my gosh, I can't think of what his name is. The man, Ed, help me here with the guy who's in charge of deporting.
Tom Homan?
Yes.
Yeah. Or a regional director of ICE might sign an administrative warrant calling for someone to be brought into custody. It is literally just the agency asking for that person. It is not something where an independent party like the judge has assessed facts and determined that it's appropriate to take the person into custody.
And the idea is that an administrative warrant would be acted upon, that person would be taken into custody subject to judicial review. And this administration is skipping that step. So
Right.
You have, ICE agents that are appearing with administrative warrants to take people into custody. Not with the issuance of that type of an administrative warrant is not for deportation. It's to begin a deportation process. And so that's the vital step that's missing.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Okay, Jeanette, you're on.
You're on mute, Jeanette.
That's because I'm staring at my Google Doc. So some questions that lump together. Is there anything that, for instance, the international courts, the UN, NATO, or even the military can do to hold Trump accountable for his actions and make him follow the law? So international courts, UN, NATO, or even the military, can they do anything to hold him accountable?
Ed, do you want to start?
Yeah, let me start. As a general proposition, the NATO is a treaty and agreement among countries for mutual defense. That doesn't really have any impact on domestic policy. You might remember we have NATO countries like Turkey and Hungary that already, don't follow the rule of law. I think in terms of the International Criminal Court, those are avenues that have not, don't necessarily sort of overrule or create an appeal, beyond our domestic courts. I think of this issue oftentimes as, in terms of they're really, I guess, to go back to where Patrick was on the No Kings rally, there really isn't anyone coming to save us except ourselves. And what we have to do is demand that the rule of law be adhered to, and that our courts be followed, and our court system be followed in this country. And that means we have to demand that from local officials, we have to demand that from federal officials, and we have to demand that Congress actually act like a Congress. And I think that that's really where the solution, as it were, for much of this is going to flow from.
And I think that at some point we will see Congress being more responsive to its citizens as time goes on. We've seen such, I can't even describe it, such devastation through executive orders in this administration. And at some point, Congress is going to have to stand up. And I feel that the more that we as citizens, reach out to, our congressmen, our congresswomen, and let them know that, like, this isn't the world that I want to be I want to be raising my children in. This isn't what, my, uncles and dad and everybody fought in wars for. Like, but we have to rise up together. And I think it's a grassroots movement, and we have to, be consistent and persuasive. And at some point, we're going to see the change that we need.
Thank you. That some of the questions were about what can we as citizens do, and I think that's been repeated now a few times, directly about peaceful protest and the things that you just summarized. A couple other questions centered around reporting these attorneys that are lying. So, for instance, when the government attorney lies, why aren't they reported to their attorney registration or disciplinary commission? Another question, pretty much the same thing. What can we do about these lying attorneys? Can they be reported?
Go ahead, Judge. No, please, Judge. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. So I will tell you, here in Illinois, we have the Attorney Registry and Disciplinary Commission. And as a judge, I am required by the Code of Ethics to report someone who appears in front of me that is acting unfavorably, toward my profession of being a lawyer. And yes, like, we are required to do that, but the proceedings are not published until after, and there's an irony to me saying this, but until after that lawyer gets due process. So, there's like all sorts of things that happen before anything would be published or there would be any sort of punishment rendered upon that lawyer. So even when lawyers are charged with criminal cases, that somebody has reported it to the ARDC, the Attorney Registry and Disciplinary Commission, and it will not be until long after that criminal conviction is entered that something will be published from the ARDC website. Now, sometimes a complaint that goes in will be published, but that's after that lawyer got some amount of due process, which takes some period of time. So yes, lawyers can be reported. In my courthouse, we have signs all over the place where you can report a lawyer, where you can report a judge. All of us have to be held accountable. All of us have to be held to the standards of our profession. So, so yes, but it takes time because due process is given to everybody.
And I think to the judge's point, you know, I think it's not an accident that one of the things, you know, we've seen this sort of, you know, these mass resignations in the Justice Department, in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. I think the reality is that, you know, because complaints in many bar associations can be made by others, even those who are not direct parties in cases, I think it is fairly likely that there are some of the attorneys who've been involved in these cases who've already been reported. We just, you know, because of, as the judge indicated, that due process piece, we just don't know yet that's occurred.
Thank you. Another question talks about financial interests. Who are these groups or individuals that have financial interests in the detention centers, including those in the USA? Who pays for ICE and who are they? Kind of a related question.
So let me start out by saying, in terms of who pays for ICE, it's you and me. Those, you know, that is, you know, that they are tax funded government employees. And one of the things, while I know that many of us, for obvious and important reasons, as Marcy referenced earlier, are very concerned about this budget for what it does to tax policy and what it does for government spending in a variety of places and what it does particularly to Medicaid programs. One of the things that you should know, and I actually spent much of last week in Washington, D.C., and one of the sad realities is that you know, one of the things that is very, very likely to happen out of this budget process is that ICE is going to get billions, somewhere in the order magnitude of $145 billion for detention and deportation. The expectation is that in addition to ICE's own facilities, you know, they literally will have something on the order of $45 billion going to private entities that build detention facilities around the United States to house people in immigration deportation hearings. You know, those companies, some of those companies are owned by private investors and by private capital. Some of them are publicly traded companies that literally do this work. They tend to be companies, you know, who have built private prisons across the United States, but are now engaged in these activities. You know, I think it's one of the great things. A little shout out here to our friends at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, who really led the effort that first private detention facilities from Illinois a few years ago, and then eliminated detention of migrants in county facilities. So we don't have immigration detention in Illinois the way they do in many other states. But these private facilities are something we're going to see building out on a mass scale after, you know, this quote unquote big, beautiful bill is passed.
And I think that we need to look at the recipients who are going to be getting awarded these contracts to build these private detention facilities, and be concerned about who they are connected to, because you know, I think we all know that he is just, you know, looking to make his friends even more wealthy. So, but it is true in Illinois, you know, we just don't have, we're not exposed to it the way that other states are. So, but in time, we're going to be seeing more and more of these private detention facilities, and that type of mismanagement is, you know, well documented in our history, and it's not good. So
Jeanette, can I just jump in for one more moment on this? I think this is one of the areas, though, when we think as Illinois residents, when you're thinking about a specific sort of ask, if you're in a district where your member of Congress is not going to vote for this particular budget package and isn't going to support Trump immigration policy, I think one of the things that we can do is really ask our members of Congress to go and visit these detention centers, to really speak up and talk about these issues, to bear witness to what's going on. We know that the conditions are horrific. We've seen, in fact, just while we've been on the phone, we've been on this call tonight, I've seen the report that the president's former personal lawyer, who's the United States attorney in New Jersey, has charged a member of Congress for trying to go and visit one of these detention centers, a week plus ago. Like, it is going to be really important that all members of Congress show up in these facilities and look at what's happening. That is going to be, that kind of oversight is going to be really critical as we move forward.
Okay. One question, do judges like getting letters from citizens who are concerned about what's happening?
So the most honest answer I can give is we never see them. My mail is, I don't even have even if you were to Google me and find my work email, I never see it. Everything that I get is screened. So, and if it's a threat, really, that's the only time. If it's a threat against me or my family, then that is something that I know. But yeah, these are just not things that I see. So, and no judge, I mean, none of the judges in my building do. So it's, there's that layer of protection that kind of insulates us from that. And, so I would have to say no, because we don't get them.
Okay. Earlier, there was a question about state laws, such as privacy data laws. Can these be used to protect our data from Musk, the Palantir data heist? Yeah.
So the short answer is, it is better to have strong state privacy protections and to protect as much of the data as we possibly can. I think we're all concerned about, what we're going to discover a year or 2 years or 5 years from now that DOJ has taken in terms of our personal data, from, healthcare data to banking records to other things like that. So I think that everything that we can do to strengthen our protections at the state level, to ensure that, for example, before, one of the other things that we often raise concerns about is that when, you do business with a company, if they can sell that data to a third-party vendor, government can buy it from a third party. That can be stuff that's in government files. So I think all of the protections that we can build around that at the state level are really critical. We at the ACLU, working with others, had worked diligently this session for a kind of a large health data privacy bill that would cover our health data in Illinois. I don't know that we're going to get there by the end of the session. I think our hope is that when the legislature comes back in the fall, we'll be able to pass that. But I think that is exactly the kind of thing that one, should be looking at, because I think those laws really do make a difference.
Okay. I think there's some questions about back to the judge's mail, and does anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
I read some of the comments. So
okay.
It's not so much that we're not interested in what people are interested in. But as judges, I mean, we have to be, objective. And most oftentimes we hear what people are interested in through our state legislature and our legislators and the proposed bills, statutes, whatever it is. I'm on the committee for the implementation of Karina's Law, which just went into effect 2 weeks ago. And so this has been a project that, we are working on. I, I, I get my leads, about what people are interested in from the state legislature, from our county board members, and then, anytime that we are asked to review proposed pending legislation, we can do so. And, obviously the implementation is up to us. So, and we have to work with our stakeholders and our partners in the court system to implement, again, like the most recent thing that we're doing is Karina's Law. But we had to work with the Office of the Illinois Courts regarding forms, with the state's attorney's office, because this is not, it's analogous to a firearm restraining order, but Karina's Law allows pro se individuals to come in and request a search warrant. So we have created forms that help the pro se litigant, and we have judges that are on, duty 24/7 in order to review the request for these search warrants. And then it's sent to law enforcement, and then they do their part, and then there is a judicial review process. So it's not that we don't care. It's just we're getting our information from really from our state legislators and the county stakeholders.
Yeah, and there's a couple other questions. I know someone has their hand up, but we're only taking questions in the chat. If you could please put them in the chat, that would be great. One question, and this is something that I'm concerned about too, since I'm a retired RN. Because of all the data, that one person asked, what about HIPAA? What happened to HIPAA?
The HIPAA still exists and still protects you in terms of the release of your data, especially to various parties. The problem is that when, for example, you get your health insurance, or when you fill out detailed forms that include your medical records for various government programs, the government now has that data. And one of the concerns is the way in which that data gets shared. And the second thing is what is not often protected by HIPAA is when you share your medical information with third parties, third-party apps that you may record personal medical information about. Those of us who wear these devices on our wrists that capture all kinds of data about our health. Those are things that, because you've shared it with a third party who's not, a medical person, then HIPAA doesn't necessarily protect that data in those instances. And we think there ought to be more protections in Illinois for that.
And as a follow-up to it, someone just asked, and this is just about data in general, can we find out what data they have looked at by filing a Freedom of Information Act in regards to our personal data that's being used?
So the short answer to that is yes. There is a form that you can fill out to ask, to seek the records that the government has collected about you as an individual. I know there are entities in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere who have been looking at creating online forms for people to be able to file, to seek, say, for example, from Doge, what information about each and any of us that they have gathered. One of the things that, the ACLU did somewhat early on was to file FOIA requests for what information DOJ was collecting. I know this will be shocking to you, given the fact they like to announce they're the most transparent administration in American history. They have not responded to those FOIA requests. We're now suing them to get that information. So that's going to be the other route that we are likely to have to go.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm gonna turn this over to Linda now, because I'll bet she has several other questions that are in her docket.
Yeah, there's a couple. One, and this is, I think the question would be from a legal perspective and two different people. So somebody who is taken or, I guess I would call it attacked, or at least approached by a masked person, no badges, no information about who they are. If they fight back and actually can escape, can they be held liable? And second part of that question is, if somebody helps them, because again, they don't know who these people are and they help the person, escape, is there legal, can that person who helped also be in trouble? Or because they didn't have any indication of who they are, it's fine?
So best case scenario, and everybody in Illinois has body camera on them now. So yes, if you are resisting a police officer in the lawful execution of something, which includes your arrest, then yes, you can be charged with resisting, or you can be charged with obstructing, if you're giving the wrong name or something like that. But the problem is when you have, as I said earlier, you have ICE agents showing up with masks on and not identifying themselves, and somebody else videotaping it. That's scary. But if they take you into custody, are they taking you into ICE custody? If you end up in a state facility or a county facility, and they haven't identified themselves, you have, again, ironically, due process where, ultimately a judge like me can throw it out and say, well, they didn't identify themselves, it wasn't resisting, things like that. The problem is that once you get taken into ICE custody, you don't have any due process as it stands right now. So oftentimes it just depends on the agency that is arresting you. Again,
But if you're a person that actually helps somebody and they don't get arrested because, it's unmarked people, so to speak, and you help that person escape, are you safe from the law? Theoretically.
No.
So no.
If you are any sort of interference with a lawful arrest, again, like I keep having to go back to that, is, some form of obstruction. But if it's an administrative order and you're obstructing the execution of an administrative warrant, I don't know who is prosecuting you for that. And is that going to land you in front of a judge? I mean, I would hope it would, but that's just not something that I don't think we're seeing that right now. Ed, have you seen anything like that?
We haven't seen that thus far, but I think as you indicated earlier, Judge, I think the fact that we're seeing so many of these ICE raids and the execution of warrants across the country with ICE agents that are masked, who aren't identifying themselves, who simply, as we saw, in the case of the student from Tufts University, just approaching people on the street without indicating who they are and taking them into custody. I think it's a legitimate concern about what would happen to someone who thought that they were simply stopping someone from being kidnapped or harassed or harangued in some form or fashion. And I just don't know that we know the answer to what that would be, if there would then be an effort, in order to, I think in order to how the courts would deal with that person, what that circumstance might be. I will just say, and I think you identified it earlier, Judge, that, remember that in the wake of the campus protests last year, where some students were masked, there were literally states that passed laws that said you cannot protest wearing a mask. But apparently, you can arrest people wearing a mask and not identify yourself as actually being a law enforcement agent.
Okay, so definitely the recommendation is, if you're pretty sure you know what's going on, take video.
That's exactly
Always.
right. Yeah, especially in Illinois, record it.
Okay. Totally different subject, just curiosity on the, this is threatened all the time. Can Trump actually reverse Biden's pardons?
Go ahead, Judge.
I don't think so. Do you?
The short answer is no. As the Trump administration likes to tell us, the pardon is a plenary power given to the executive. Nobody went back and tried to, reverse the pardons of, I don't know, Joe Arpaio, or, fill in the blank of, Roger Stone, or the cast of characters that the president pardoned. So there's no way. And this idea, that there's some auto pen that signed all these, and ergo, that's the reason, or would be the hook for doing it. I would just remind you that at one point, when President Trump was asked when he signed the order invoking the Enemy Aliens Act, because remember, he did that in the middle of the night, so that they didn't have, they weren't able, he hoped that nobody would be able to challenge it, signed it in the middle of the night on a Friday. He literally said, "I don't remember." So it would be a somewhat of a reach to go back and reverse somebody else's pardons.
Yeah, well, projection. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Judge.
It certainly has never been done. I mean, the idea of a presidential pardon it's long-standing in our government. And, somebody's always going to be ticked off, when somebody gets pardoned, but it's in the presidential, it's their discretion. That's why they do it at the end of their term. So.
So one more question, and then I'll turn it over to Marcy, or unless we have time for Jeanette to do more questions. Somebody just asked, and this is a good question, can he really suspend habeas corpus, Trump? Or my understanding, it has to be the Congress. Is that true?
The short answer to this is no, not without congressional approval. Congress has always acted to do this in this way. I think the fact that they send Stephen Miller out to the driveway of the White House to talk about this shows in some ways that this is not. I know that that some people won't agree. I just don't think this is a serious thing. I mean, the reality is, that habeas is the presumption. Miller makes it sound like the presumption is habeas doesn't exist unless the executive grants it. That's not the way the Constitution reads. Habeas is intended to exist for everyone, and it would take an act of Congress to support and suspend habeas corpus, and not simply the actions of the executive.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Marcy.
Anyway, this is just my question. I didn't see it in the chat. Okay, so as you mentioned, habeas corpus, they're not really allowed to do, they're not really allowed to suspend that, and they're not really allowed to do whatever it is they're doing. Because this particular president has immunity, because SCOTUS gave him immunity. what's to stop him? What's to stop, even the people who work under him, the courts are not really doing anything. They're just slapping their hands. Yeah, they're not allowed to do it, but they do it anyway. What's stopping them?
Well, I think that we have to, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think we need to be mindful of the fact that our Constitution has been traumatized in a very short period of time. I don't think that anybody thought that this amount of harm would occur in this short period of time. So that being said, the suspension of habeas corpus, even if he said that he was going to do it and like signed a piece of paper saying that, it would be very hard to execute. Like you have, there are layers and layers of our government that rely upon that. All of the judiciary does. So, I think at some point you're going to see, and again, I said this a little bit earlier, I think we just have to have faith that at some point, like our congressional leaders are going to rise up against this. And every day I wake up and I think to myself, oh my gosh, like, is this the day? But I think we're getting ever closer to that. But I agree with that. Suspending habeas corpus I think it's a talking point.
Let me add, I agree. Let me add one more thing, Marcy, to that answer, which is I think that all of us, the very next opportunity that we have, the very thing that we ought to demand from Congress and from a new president is to pass a bill that reverses the immunity decision by the Supreme Court and have that signed into law. They literally created something that our framers and founders would have never done. It is an abomination, and we should never risk this, even if we never have a president who is as corrupt and venal as the president we currently have. Presidents should not have immunity from criminal prosecution.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So yes, we'll see what happens. I don't know. This particular Congress will not do it, but hopefully the next one will, because we're in. Well,
we are gearing up for 2026, and at some point these members of Congress who are not standing up to Trump, they're going to have to face their constituents. Look at these town halls where, some of them now aren't even doing town halls because even the constituents that voted for them are like, wait, what? You're doing nothing? We're getting there. It just isn't fast enough.
Anyway, we only have a few minutes left. Jeanette, are there any more questions in the chat? After that, we'll really quick do our announcements one more time before we adjourn. So, Jeanette?
Yeah, I think we've covered a large bucket of categories. So I think we should be good.
Okay. So we'll just make announcements one more time. I will talk about the phone banks and then I'll pass it on to Patrick. So again, phone banks every Sunday, 4 to 5:30. It's going to be telling constituents in the 3 Republican districts in Illinois that their member of Congress is planning to cut Medicaid, and that what that would mean to them and what that would mean to their communities. And so please join us. I have links in the chat to sign up. They're on Zoom to sign up for the 25th and June 1st. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick for the rest of the announcements and to see us out. And by the way, Ed and Judge O'Connell, you both rock.
Hey, Marcy, before you get on, can I throw something at you and you can yell at me later? There are some people who are definitely on from other states, if they're still on, and in red areas. And your process of making phone calls to people in those districts to tell them what their representative's doing is really impactful. So if they have any questions about how they can do that, can they reach out to you?
Yes, they can. Yes,
Okay.
I would love to talk to you about how to do phone banks in your own in your own congressional districts, especially if you're a bright red congressional district. Also, to kind of dovetail onto that, even if you don't live in Illinois, these particular three congressional districts are also, let's say, representative of all the Republican congressional districts in the US, where all of the Republicans in Congress are trying to cut Medicaid. Come join us, and then we'll join you. So anyway, I'll turn it over to Patrick now. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Marcy, and thank you to our panel members. Thank you, Edianka, and thank you, Judge O'Connell. Thank you for your comments and just presenting what we can do and why we should be concerned about some of these violations to the court. And I think there are a lot of great things that were said, and some of the things that I want to hone in on that I think are very important of what we can do is we have to pressure our members of Congress, whether we're in districts where the members of Congress reflect our values, or if we're in districts where the members of Congress do not reflect our values. We have to pressure them to make bold decisions and to take bold positions on these particular issues that we are concerned about. These members of Congress depend on us not paying attention as constituents, and we have to make sure that they know that we are paying attention. We've been very successful here in Illinois with that. If you're in a district where your member of Congress reflects your values, they're on board, pressure them to be more vocal. We want them to be more vocal on these issues, and we need to pressure them on that. Invite them to the rallies that we're holding. So if we're holding a No Kings rally or any type of rally, invite them to be a speaker at that particular rally. Thank them for being bold champions on these particular issues. And if they're not being very bold, call them out on it. If they're deciding to be quiet and not take bold positions in the press or in Congress on these particular issues, call them out on those issues. If you have a member of Congress that doesn't reflect your values, show up at their town halls and question them on their positions, question them on their votes on these issues. If they refuse to hold town halls, hold an empty chair town hall where you have someone there that represents them, and then you invite the press, and then you ask those particular questions. Work with your local Indivisible groups to make phone calls, as we are doing here in Illinois. Work with Marcy to make phone calls here in Illinois. But team up with your local Indivisible group if you're in another state and make phone calls into those red districts where they may not reflect your values. Also, go door-to-door canvassing. Talk with constituents about these particular issues. You're going and you're just having an issue-based canvass where you're talking with constituents about their elected officials' positions on the issues. So we have a number of events coming up. You've heard about the phone banks that are coming up. We're going to be doing some canvassing coming up as well. We also would ask you to join us for our Blue State Convening, which is going to take place on June the 28th in Champaign. It's going to be a fun day. It's going to be from 10 to 5. We're going to hear from a lot of our coalition partners as well as elected officials, and we're going to do some strategic planning as we head towards 2026. Again, I want to thank Ed, and I also want to thank Judge O'Connell for being our panel members here. Support great judges like Judge O'Connell. I'll put her website into the chat. I know she's going to be running for the appellate court, so we want to support great judges who are doing good things. Support great organizations like the ACLU that are doing great work out there as well. You can always find us on our website as well, indivisible.illinois.org, to find out about all of our upcoming events. Thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you for the next event.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.